You were probably expecting a 3D mock-up video today, and instead, we're going to be taking a look at the carriage because I got stuck on it because I was enjoying so much trying to design it. Hi, welcome back to another Terranscapes video. Thank you, by the way, for joining me. This video has an intro that's a little different. I decided to split this video, well, actually, to do two versions of it. One, a very short sort of summary video, and the other, an at the bench video, which is how I was originally planning on shooting this, but I know not everybody wants to watch the full hour length of me going on about it. So if you are at the bench video, know that there's a little short summary one. And if you're at the short summary one, know that if you're interested in more detail, there's the full at the bench video in the playlist right next to this one, like that. So what are we going to look at today? We're going to look at the carriage, which I'm now calling the touring carriage rather than, I was going to think about carriage bus. I don't know what to call it because it doesn't have horses. Is it a carriage? I'm calling it the touring carriage. And the reason we're looking at that and not the 3D mock-up, as I originally predicted, is that I wanted to design the carriage roughly so I knew what I'd be shaping to put in the mock-up. And because the carriage has some different elements like the steam, tanks and pipework in the back and a long, front wheel, there's some empty spaces and some full spaces. And I thought I should probably do the profile and start to get a sense of that. And as I was doing that, I got kind of swept up in it. I realized this is the most important element, I think, and most complicated piece for the display. And so I said, screw it. I'm just sitting down with it, and I'm just going to design it out. So that's what we're going to take a look at today. And I'll see you on the flip side. So last time I did an At the Bench video, I recorded it while I was working and then went back to edit it, and that was kind of nightmarish because trying to cut out stuff that isn't interesting, but also making sure my dialogue is consistent and makes sense, and that wasn't very easy. So I decided to try something a little bit different for this one, and that was to record all of the footage of me working, and then I could go in and do some quick edits on that, and then do a voiceover. So it's a slightly modified version, but I hope you enjoy this and enjoy sitting down with me while I work on the carriage plans. So get a coffee like I have in front of me and sit back and glance over from time to time. So the first thing I did when I started on these plans is I put up in front of me a printout. I collected several photos of steampunk carriage ideas and examples, and this time I actually posted them right in front of me while I was working. So that way I had some references that I could look at rather than just trying to go from my memory. And that produced kind of an interesting effect. I found it really, really helpful to do that. But at the same time, it did drive my designs to be somewhat similar to the ones that I had seen. So there's sort of a compromise there between fostering maximum creativity in terms of raw design and making sure that you don't go far astray while you're working on something. But overall, I felt pretty good about the process that I went through. And the first thing that you're kind of seeing here is that I'm working on some preliminary sketches. And one of the things that's a challenge for me is to try to be quick with my early sketches. Since I'm likely to make significant revisions to them along the way, spending a lot of time on getting the initial sketches, trying to get them really looking right, it ends up being quite a bit of a waste of time. But one of my personal challenges is that I can't, oh, by the way, this footage is at 3x speed, so just so you know. So we got about 3 hours and a half of footage here compressed down to one. And that allowed me, a little tangent here, that allowed me to show you more of the work at the bench rather than just, recording it as my dialogue, which I can't speed up while I'm actually working. So there's another benefit to this format. Where was I? I was talking about my process. So for me, it's very hard for me to see things when they're messy. Chaos does not work for me in general. Like, I have to have a very neat environment when I'm working. If it gets too busy or too crazy, I have to stop and I have to clean things because it starts creating visual and mental distractions for me. So it's a challenge trying to just do some rough blocking in, and this is pretty good rough blocking in for me. And I felt like I stopped rough work maybe a little early, but I just couldn't help it. So one of the things when I was designing the carriage is so I'm now calling this the tour carriage because tour bus just doesn't quite seem right. So this is the tour carriage, and I want to have 3 rows of chairs, benches for passengers, which is probably a mistake because that encourages me to put more miniatures on it, which, yowzers, there's a lot of sculpting work that's going to have to be done there. But it felt like I wanted to have a central component down below, which is something that I saw on many of the examples, that little enclosed carriage spot, in the center of the vehicle. And one of the ideas I had early on is to have that wide open, to have it sort of be another bench area underneath that isn't enclosed, and it just doesn't seem quite right. Plus, it's going to be really dirty for the passengers, because they're close to the ground and the wheels. So I ended up going with the closed-in look, and I carry that through the rest of the design work. And you can see me trying to figure out what to do with the seats at this moment. I need to get some miniatures to actually get this down pat, because I actually discovered while I was working on this that after all my work of measuring the miniatures and trying to get, how far his knees and his thighs and, how long do his feet extend out and all that, I was drawing it and I kept looking at it and thinking something looks wrong. And I put the miniature up against the paper and I was like, this doesn't look right. And I don't know where I went astray in trying to put it together, but I believe the original seating plan I had was too small. So that actually had the benefit, though, of allowing me to shorten the front of the carriage. So the carriage actually didn't get longer, even though I ended up extending some things. And it was interesting to see how the proportions of some of the areas changed, but not extending it beyond that original length, which is, I think about 6.5 inches was my original idea. So I really need to get some miniatures, and I need to sit down with them, and I need to break one at the knees and waist, and then make a seat for him. So that's actually going to happen before I actually start real construction on the carriage. I should have mentioned that I had said I was going to be going right to the 3D mock-up from the last video, and I was thinking I would just, throw something together for the carriage, and that made me think, well, I need some rough plans for it, maybe something just a little bit more detailed than the original top-down sketch I had, or the top-down. Yeah, I had a top-down, I think. And I felt like, well, I needed a side view as well so I could do that mock-up. And once I started this process, I couldn't stop. I was like, first of all, I'm enjoying designing the carriage a lot, and it's also seemed to me very important to get that laid out a little bit more, so that I could really understand what its profile looks like. Because with the front wheel extending, for instance, that's a lot of open space in front of the vehicle, and where the tanks and whatnot in the back are, that has a much heavier weight and is going to block some of, say, the buildings or some of the residents if they're behind it. So I felt like I needed to do this first, and then once I started it, I said, screw it, I'm just going to do the whole carriage design now, and then I can order a miniature while I start working on the 3D mock-up, and we'll go from there. And this is the only instance where I've sketched in some actual miniatures on the seats. I've realized that it's not entirely useful because I don't know exactly how big they're going to be, so I just decided to go with just the seats themselves as the focus going forward. All right, so it's time to set that aside and make some notes. Actually, hold on just a second. Let me go back. Let's stop this. I'm also trying to record this a little differently so I can do this. Are we going to be able to go backwards? Why am I not being able to go backwards? Oh, there we go. And so you can see here, I'll put a bell here, ping, that once I finish, I throw in some notes around the sketch to help me think about areas to focus on for the next version. So in this point here, I'm actually just kind of pointing out like structural changes, balance, getting things, just big block wise, a little bit more in proportion. One thing I should mention just before we leave this is the middle wheel there, the front big wheel of the carriage. I thought about putting in leaf springs. I figured there needs to be some kind of suspension system to not keep it bouncing around when the passengers are on it. Right now, the rear wheel, that's more challenging because it's connected to the drive chain, shaft and gearing. And I actually came up with a solution, which I'll show you in the final drawing, but that added a little bit of a thinky for me, thinky, in terms of there needs to be something. And in one of the sketches I was looking at, sorry, this is off screen, I actually cut out a lot of footage of me not being centered. It was a little challenging along the way. But I wanted to leave it in here just so you could see the very, very beginning of this one. So we'll talk about the suspension maybe a little bit later. But here you see me using, this is French Curves template, I believe. And I had bought this quite a while ago with all my other drafting stuff. And I've never really used it very much. And I think I'm using it maybe a little early here in terms of, again, it's being a bit more rigid in the draft rather than just, throwing some sketches on the paper. But I found it helpful to create, nice regular curves, but I found it challenging to make things symmetrical using it because when I flip it over, I have to make sure I've lined it up pretty much the exact same way. And that can be a little challenging since the French curve template doesn't have any markings on it. Here you see me, ding, getting the miniature back out. Like, well, can he stand in this carriage? If he's in there, can he stand up to get out of it in the center area there? So that became a bit of a focus for me in terms of how do I put seats in there? How big does it need to be to have passengers sitting in it, facing each other, and able to get up and get out? And the you're going to see, I think at some point, I actually try to draw in some chairs in there to get a sense of how's that going to work, because it's a little bit confusing to me. And I think I got it pretty well in the end, but that was certainly an area of focus. One thing, there's a little tangent here, one thing that I don't know if people find interesting or not are the tools that I use when I'm sketching. That's a 5mm mechanical pencil. It's the only kind of pencil I like to use. I don't like using a regular sharpened pencil because it gets dull. In fact, I find I find the 5mm pencil gets too dull for me, so I actually constantly rotate it in my fingers so I can get a sharp edge on it, right? Because even that little tiny piece of lead will get a flat spot on it. So yeah, that's how I work. And right now I'm trying to work on a canopy over the seating area. And there's an example in one of the references that I have, and I felt like these people need something if they're going to go out, say, in a day that might be threatening rain or something like that. And that was a bit of a challenge as well. And when I make some changes later on, I'll come back to this, but that's kind of what I'm trying to work on right now. So back to some of the tools. If you're a longtime viewer, you might recognize that ruler. That ruler is an Incra Ruler, and I have 3 of them, and they are the most precise rulers available that I think. They're absolutely amazing. Each of the marks on them have a hole that accepts a 5mm pencil lead. So you can put a precise dot exactly on the line, the exact thickness. And if you look at the very end of it, just beyond the 1 inch, towards the left, there's actually a little indent where you can strike a line on the edge that isn't on the outside of the ruler. So you get a precise line there as well. I have one that's this one, the 6 inch. I have their 12 inch. And then I have a 10 inch that is in metric and tenths of an inch. And I love them. They're a little bit tricky as a straight edge in that they have a little bit of a texture along the ridge where the lines are, but those don't extend all the way to the bottom. So if you tilt your pencil just a little bit, you'll get a smooth line. But if you try to run it vertically against the edge, you'll get a little bit of a bumpiness from those indentations. But these are the only rulers I like to use, although I have a really crappy one. It's an 18-inch ruler, and it's aluminum, and you may see it. I'd still use it from time to time, more than I'd like, but the markings are all rubbing off, and I have to turn it over because only one side has accurate. I can see all of the markings on it, and I don't know. It's dumb, but I don't know. It's the only 18-inch I have, and it's quick and it's dirty. And when I don't want to get out these nice rulers, I do use it from time to time. So one thing you'll notice while I'm working is that I do a lot of erasing. Again, that's kind of counter to the get it quick and dirty and throw it aside and get on to your next one. So I'm not a fast drafter because of that, and I think it's just part of the way I work in terms of, again, going back to I sort of need things a little neat. And in fact, when I'm erasing, I demand a very clean erasing. And so the erasers that I have, the one that you've been seeing me use mostly, it's this it's like a mechanical eraser. Hold on. While you watch, I'm going to get it. And I got it on on Amazon. It is the Paper Mate Tough Stuff eraser stick. This eraser pen, if you want to, is absolutely phenomenal. Really phenomenal. It comes with replacement, although I've still yet to go through the first sort of fill of eraser, and it gives a very clean erase, and that's really important to me. So if you're looking for a great refillable eraser, and it's the one to go to. Plus, because it's inside the pen, you probably didn't expect to get a little explanation of erasers, huh? It doesn't dry out the way like a regular pencil top eraser will. So Can't recommend it enough. And when I erase with it, I tend to erase with it at a very acute angle to the paper, and that helps to continuously keep a bit of a sharper tip on it, so that when I need to get into a very tight area, I have a little bit more of a point on it. And just so I don't come back to the eraser later on, one of the things that I do with it now is that when I really need a fine point on it, I actually take a razor and I actually shave it down to a very fine point. And doing that, I can really get into some tight spots without messing up other areas. And it's important for me, being a neat freak, and I just want to recommend it. It's a fantastic eraser. The other eraser that I use that you see is the big white eraser. That's a Farber eraser. A friend had one once when I was gaming, and I was like, oh, can I borrow your eraser? And as soon as I touched it and I raced with it, I was like, I have to have this eraser. So soft, such a clean erasing. It's like a magic eraser. It's beautiful. So anyway, if you have questions about these things, I could tell you in the comments. So there's all my tools that I'm using while I'm drafting. Oh, I guess then the last thing, hold on, I got to turn that off. And what I'm using for a tablet to draft on, you'll see, you can see it poking through on the left side of the screen, is an Illuminated drafting tablet. It's basically just a thin plastic plate, and it's LED powered, so it can backlight. And I use tracing paper, and I can even have 2 or 3 layers of tracing paper over the graph paper, and still see through all of those layers when I'm backlighting it. So it's really nice. My workbench is very bumpy, and it's not good to draw on, and I don't like drawing on a pad because the pad is very soft. So this gives me a nice hard surface. It's really clean to draft on, and I have the option of illuminating it if I so desire. And then you can see up in the corners, I just throw some blue tape on the corners of the paper and tape it down, and that way I can continuously just throw tracing paper right over the graph paper, and the tracing paper is nice and clean and it's easy to erase. And when I take it off the graph paper, it visually comes through a lot cleaner as well. So I really enjoyed this little setup that I have, and I use it for all of the sort of drafting and sketching work that I do. So now I'm working on the 3rd version, and we're 20 minutes into this video, and I will spend almost the remainder of the time on this version. And it's a little bit early maybe to go to the final version, but I don't know. I just felt like I had enough of a conception to stick with one idea from here on, although I make some moderate changes along the way. It's how it works. I find the design work like this very enjoyable, but at the same time, it feels a little pressing to get it done so that I can start building. And this is a new experience for me, in that I feel pressed to get to the construction for you guys. I think at some point you're probably going to be done watching me draw things and you'd like to see me actually build something. Whereas in the past, I have felt that way for my client, thinking I need to get past this stage to get building for them. So still, I'm in the same position, and I think even if I didn't have anybody, so to speak, looking over my shoulder, I would feel the same way. Doing this drafting work here, I'm showing you 3 hours of work, but I probably spent, 20, maybe, I don't know, that's probably a little high, but I spent a long time doing these drafts, and I feel like it's really important, though. Imagine going through the process of building and then trying to make these kinds of revisions along the way. I mean, that's just insane. So it's important. I enjoy it, but it takes a while, and that can feel a little frustrating for me because I'm not very quick at it. So, pros and cons, challenges, rewards, part of the life of what it is that I do. Now, at this point, while I'm working on the windows and the door, I had some challenges in trying to envision what that would look like. And looking at the reference photos that I have, I didn't feel like I wanted something, I wanted to be a little unique. I wanted to sort of make it something that's a little stands on its own. What I started working towards, which you see here, and I changed quite a bit later on, is I was kind of going for a little bit of a diving bell look. I was thinking, because I'm next to the harbor, that it might help me convey a sense of a connection to the water, and that really was a mistake. Well, I don't want to call it a mistake. It was not a direction that I ended up going in, because I lost the, oh, wait a minute, before I continue. So you see here where I'm trying to match up the sides, and I'm like, wait a minute, where was that? How does that match? And why is that not right? And I couldn't quite get it. I get it, but it takes me a few instances. So that's what I was talking about with the French curves template, that it's not always the easiest to get good symmetry. And another aspect of this particular part of the design is that I had originally intended the bottom of the carriage, I don't know what to call this, the carriage chamber, I don't know, to have a more of a point at the bottom. But when I was looking at some of the references, and then when I was thinking about it myself, having a flat bottom, it shortens it a little bit, and it allows a little more foot space for the passengers, and it just sort of made more sense to have that flat bottom. I didn't mention this tool when I was describing my, hope you don't mind if I vape from time to time here. I didn't mention this tool. I have 2 circle templates as well. This one, and then a larger one that's the same part of the set. And I find those to have not been something I've used a lot in the past, but ended up using extensively here. And that's kind of one of the interesting things about having a bunch of stuff in the studio. I've bought a lot of things over the years, and sometimes I haven't used them very much. And then all of a sudden, I'm like, oh, I need that. Thank God I bought it. And I'm very picky and careful about the things that I purchase, even for stuff at home, and especially for stuff at home. And I want to make sure that it's something that is going to be used. And I find that sometimes I question the purchase, like some of this drafting material. I'm like, did I really need to buy all of this? But then sure enough, down the road, I've got it, and I'm really glad that I have it. So, you know, it's kind of a little, maybe a little window into my thinking. But interestingly enough, when I've shifted away from certain things, and I don't expect to be going back to them, then I have all these materials that I was using quite a lot that I'm not using anymore. And I have some mold making materials that are like that. And so I don't know. It's a little weird. I don't like, you know, Terranscapes is not a profitable business. So I really try to be careful in what I purchase. And these are some of the things that, I don't know, that roll around in the back of my mind as an artist living on a very tight budget. So we've jumped ahead a little bit here. And the front of the carriage where the driver sits and that front wheel became, of course, its own area of focus and challenge. Where I started with the driver here was, I liked a lot. I had him pretty low, and so he's sort of just riding just above the ground, right in front of the main front wheel of the carriage, and it seemed like a great place for him. But you'll see later that I had to move him a bit to work with the seating that is right above him, which were planned to be passengers. And one of the things that I had to also consider is that the head of a passenger or the driver sits above the back of the chair. So I've got to leave some space above the chair to accommodate that and not make it feel cramped for the passengers or the driver. So, you know, interesting conundrum that I modify as I go along. Now, when I'm placing the wheels, one of the major considerations that I've been trying to work through along the way is where the axle is going to go. If I want big wheels, and I want pretty big wheels, I am forced to push the wheels out away from the main body. Otherwise, they're going to, say, overlap the door to the carriage underneath. And that meant I had to think about how they were going to attach. And the rear wheel is an extreme example of that because of its much larger size. So what I decided to do, I felt a little proud about this solution, is that if I put the front wheel on a flexible, a pivoting lever, I should say, then I can have a shock absorber above it so that it can flex up and down on that pivoting axle. So there I get my suspension system, and putting in you know, sort of a shock absorber above it is going to be much easier than trying to model leaf springs, for instance. And I haven't seen anything like that in any of my references, so I felt like, oh, that's kind of nice, something a little original that I think is going to work out really well. And there's the pivot join, but that's going to have to change a little bit probably once I get the final model underway and I get a better sense of how the axles are going to meet the body of the carriage. I plan on doing a new top-down so that I can incorporate these new design elements to make that more accurate. But I'm not going to be doing a front or a rear view since I can, for the most part, I can see those visually pretty easily. But I feel like I need the top down to get a sense of the, well, I need it for the width of the vehicle and I'm going to make a very, I promise myself, I'm going to make a very simple mock-up, 3D mock-up of the carriage to plan out the scene. But I really need that top-down view combined with the side view. I wish I had taken some classes on drafting. I think that it would have helped so much, you know, when I was in college, just take a drafting class, because one of my really big deficits is not being able to do a perspective drawing. And I actually bought some perspective drawing books, and I was practicing for a while, and I spent quite a bit of time actually on it. And I think based on that experience, if I took some time, I could get a perspective drawing done on it, but it would take me a while, too long, and I'm slow enough as it is. But boy, that would really make viewing this anything that I draw so much easier. Saying that, there are bound to be people who are going to suggest that and have done so in the past many times, that I should do this kind of design work, say in SketchUp or something like that, where it's, on the computer I can rotate it in any direction. I've said this before, I'll say it again. Oh, this is my protractor, and I really hate working with it. I hate working with it. But I don't have another protractor, so I'm just getting by with it, and it's what I've got, and I use it so infrequently I've been reluctant to purchase another one, although I could probably get a plastic protractor for $2 on Amazon. Maybe I should just go and buy one and just put it in the drafting box. Where was I? Computer drafting. I played around in SketchUp for probably about 4 or 5 hours maybe, and I was learning, but it was very time consuming for me to get a handle on how that, how to fluently rotate things and how to create shapes and attach them, and all of that, and something like this where there's a lot of curves, and it would take me forever to try to draw this in SketchUp until I got fluent in it. And I have so much software I want to be fluent in that I just haven't been willing to devote the time to it. And quite frankly, I'm a little old-fashioned. I love paper and pencil. I love the erasing and the sitting at the bench, and there's a real pleasure to that I'm reluctant. If I was annoyed by drawing with paper and pencil, if I hated this process, I probably would have moved to the computer already. But because I enjoy it, and that's where I'm at. And in the long run, I'm probably slowing myself down, because once I got fluent, that would be a bonus to be doing it on the computer. But it's just I don't think it's ever going to happen. I would love to be fluent in a couple different programs that I haven't even studied. So, we have to choose where we're going to expend our time. And that's so. I guarantee you, if you're watching the video and you've listened this far, look in the comments. Somebody hasn't listened to this part, and they're going to tell me, why didn't you do it in Google SketchUp? And back to the drafting work that I'm doing here. So I'm working on the rear wheel, and in fact, at this moment, I'm trying to envision the spokes and the gears. This is actually the gear for the rear wheel, which I'm envisioning being quite large. And here you see me. I'm like, okay, I'm going to use the ruler for this. And then you'll see me, okay, screw the ruler. I'm just going to draw them in. There are limits to my neuroticism. But you'll notice the axle of the wheel. It occurred to me that I can do something similar to the front wheel, and I can extend it backwards. And in fact, I'm going to show you some watch hands at the end of the video. I won't explain it any more than that, but I can use them perhaps to make the axle holder, and I think that gives me a lot of flexibility in how I want to work with the rear wheel. And I need some of that space to accommodate the gearing, because if I have a large gear in the back wheel, I need space in front of it to have the smaller gears that drive it. So you can see, that I when I start putting in those gears here, you can see I start to try to I get a sense of that I quickly start to fill up that space. And if I want to have other elements there, you know, I don't know, little metal plates or a pipe or whatever, that little section of canvas, if you will, starts to fill up pretty quick. But I'm having some difficulty with trying to get gears that work for this, and I'm going to show you some gears that I have. And actually today I made some great discoveries on getting gears that I think might work, and I'm not going to talk about it in this video much more than that, but that's its own search, if you will, almost, not quite, almost as extensive as it has been searching for miniatures to use for this project. One of the things that I realized a little bit later on when I'm working on this, and I think a little bit by the end of the second draft, is that I want this vehicle to feel airy. You know, when I look at some steampunk, and it varies quite a bit. The genre has some definite themes that run through it in terms of visual design, but there can be quite a bit of variety as well. That I wanted this to feel lightweight. A lot of times in steampunk universes, the underlying story background is that they have discovered some kind of, you know, super metal or super power source or whatever that allows them to design things that normally would exceed, you know, our normal physics. So one of the focuses then, you know, was thinking about how to make it feel airy. And if you look at the rear wheel, you know, the sprocket that I put in is a fairly heavy, bulky sprocket, and that is not what I want. But I ended up just putting that one in as a placeholder because I'll end up trying to find a gear for it later that feels a little bit emptier, that, you know, that has more negative space in it, basically. And so when I've been looking at other elements of the vehicle, that is something that I've been keeping in mind and trying to envision. Of course, the area in the back with the machinery and that sort of idea, that's obviously going to be heavy feeling and should, but these are just some, oh, for God's sakes, skip that. And working with the back of the vehicle and the power plant, if you will, that it's amazing how each section of the vehicle has its own challenges and design, very different design feels, very different design elements. So, you know, in the back, it's how do I give it a busy feel, I guess is the word I'm looking for. I've seen some different variations of smokestacks and pipe work behind carriages and that sort of idea, and I felt like I wanted something a little more complicated than some of the things that I've seen. I want some of the workings of steam generation and steam storage and gearing to show in the back, and pressure gauges and things like that. So this section of the vehicle is likely to change quite a bit in the final version, and depending on some of the parts that I get and some of the ideas I'll get later, because I know I'm going to come up with some radically different ideas or improvements when I actually go to start working on it. And because I haven't done the top view yet, that also gives me another perspective to think about how it's going to look, you know, sort of endgame wise. So it's an interesting little section of the vehicle to work on, and I'm kind of looking forward to it because it feels like the the most unrestricted area to work on. That's where I can really play putting things together, whereas mounting the driver's seat is a much more rigid kind of area. There's not a lot of play within it if I want to fit it into a certain zone within the vehicle. Now here you see one of the things I've been thinking about a lot for the vehicle, and one of the things that I never see in any of the references that I have. How the hell do the people on top of the vehicle get down? I have not seen anything that explains that. So what I have done is decided to think about putting in stairs that would come down the side of the vehicle. And I've left some space on either side of the carriage to have that step inward, and I'll talk about that probably a little later on. But it's not easy to put in stairs because there's quite a bit of a vertical drop. And so I don't want them sticking way off the side of the vehicle. So I've been thinking about having some section of them be folding, like they fold up against the vehicle and then you extend them when you want to get down. And of course you can always have the driver bring up a block of stairs to bridge it all the way to the ground for the passengers. But so I've put in these really crappy stairs just to hold that place and give me a chance to think about it. And I'll know more about that once I do the top-down view, and I can get a little bit more of a sense of how far they're going to extend. I actually came up with I think a great idea after I was done with all of this, of having a little bit of an elevator. I could have a little platform that comes down from the top to the bottom and have that running on a series of gears and a little track, so that just doesn't take up hardly any space at all and adds to a bit of the steampunk feel. So I was pretty excited about that solution, and that's something that I don't know if I'll really be able to show it in the top-down view, but that is something you will see in the final vehicle. I think it just provides the best solution to that problem. But it was just really interesting looking at the different references and how that's never shown. And it's kind of like when you're looking at motorcycle videos, photos, and you always see the side with the tailpipes. But what's the other side look like? So sort of similar to that. And here you can see me cleaning up those in-between areas with the very point of that eraser. And that's one of the things that, like I said before, I really like about that eraser. Even things like the spoke work on the wheels has its own sort of interesting, a little bit of a design element there, in that how many am I going to put in? The back wheel has too many, and you'll see me mark that later on. That's way too many. But that brings me to the topic of, how the hell am I going to build this? Yeah, I have no idea how I am going to construct some of these elements. Building the wheels is an interesting challenge, because if I make the spokes, if they're not perfectly matched or extremely close, and I make the wheel rim out of, say, a strip of styrene, when I put the spokes in, they'll deform the wheel, either they'll push out a section or they won't match, they won't meet the rim and cause problems. So I think I have a tool that will allow me to cut those pretty precisely. But then I have to glue them in, and they have to be within the middle of the rim, right? So I'm going to have to make a jig to create some of these pieces to space things properly and to get their heights and such lined up right. But I came up with the idea for the I'll come back to that in a second. I came up with the idea for cutting some of these pieces out by scanning this drawing, and then I can make copies of it, and then I can glue them down, with like a very light amount of a spray adhesive, and that'll just peel off after I'm done. And then I can run styrene sheets through my scroll saw. And so I can use this as a template for directly cutting out the pieces that I want. And, cutting this kind of curving design with a X-Acto blade or whatever that's a nightmare. That's never going to happen. It's never going to look good. And so the scroll saw was like a bing idea for me that I was really excited about. And here I'm doing a little bit of a railing around the top, and I've seen some examples of that as well. And that has been another, like, oh God, how am I going to do that? What I've drawn in here is much more basic than what I envision. This is definitely a placeholder. And how to create those fine posts and maybe add a little bit of a design. After my attempt at doing design work on the elf buildings to have them laser cut, it left a little bit of a bad taste in my mouth. And I won't go into it more than that, but I've decided that I would not pursue anything like that for this project, and that everything would be hand constructed. And so that leads me to, of course, some problems where I have to figure out how I'm going to actually put things together. But it also allows me to create some elements that, wouldn't easily be done with a laser cutter. And of course, for things that are round, I have to do that with round, styrene tube or something like that. And later, this is a sort of, to build a little suspense, I came up with, I think, an excellent solution for the railing. So, one of the things that is interesting about, at least the way I work, I don't know if this is, works for anybody else, but because each of my steps takes so damn long, it gives me a chance to think about things longer. And as I'm going along, and I do 4 hours, and I go away and come back the next day, and all of a sudden I've gotten an idea. And if I had ripped out all of these drafts in one day and had started construction, I would be pretty lost about how to do some things, and probably would be starting on them in one way and then change my mind and have to take them apart later. So it's been a bit of, there's an advantage, I guess is what I'm saying, to going slow and taking your time, at least for me. So like I said, it's a bit of a mixed bag, my pacing on projects and on different aspects of them, but it is one of the advantages that I'm always, grateful for, pleased with. I don't know how to explain it exactly. And here I start shading in some elements, and this is to help me visually discriminate between them, and to give maybe a little bit of a sense of depth between the layers. And those gears, again, those are very blocky gears. I will be using some much lighter, more delicate-looking gears in the final version. Another element that I was pondering as I was working on this were rivets. Rivets, rivets, rivets. How many should I have? A lot? Hardly any? Should I just have them on the steamwork behind and none on the front? I don't know. I'm still not 100% sure on how far I'll go with that. And a little bit later, you're going to see me maybe put some around the door to get a sense of what that might look like. And here I'm still with that sort of diving bell look. And I'm going to change this in a little bit. But when I put the rivets around the door, I didn't like it. I don't want the carriage to feel heavy overall. And rivets certainly imply a weight to that. Of course, I have a lot of rivet-making material that I've hardly ever used, and so the excuse to use them on a project like this is tempting. And I will be putting in a handful to many rivets in the steamwork section of the vehicle, certainly. But how to tie that into certain areas, I don't know. I think I'm going to keep them pretty much relegated to the back of the vehicle and have the front of it be basically wood construction in essence. I'm not going to be putting in planking for the construction of the carriage body. It's not like that kind of a wood, but a wood feel rather than a metal plating feel is definitely where I'm going. And here you see me putting in some of those notes that I add to all of my drafts. And really, even though these are all things I'm thinking about, sometimes for multiple days on end, even longer, I still throw them down in case I come away from this draft for a while, and when I come back to it, it jog my memory. It also kind of gives me another way of thinking and problem solving, because sometimes as I'm writing down my thoughts on the paper, it jogs me to think about a solution. So throwing in notes on the draft is always something kind of important to me. So I'm trying to think about where the door handle should go. To me, the door handle should be reachable by the driver, since he needs to let people out, but it can't be at the very bottom in case the passengers want to use it themselves. Trying to, that's why I used the miniature a couple minutes back to throw them up against the door and see where is this going to go exactly. So after pausing for a second, I realized that the recording quality was crappy. So I've made some changes, and I may need to change my software as well, but I think this setting will produce a better result. Not happy about that, but we'll work on that. I'm not going to re-record the first part because it was an hour of me chatting, and I try to keep it feeling kind of fresh and natural. So let us continue. If you noticed, I just made some notes about the windows of the carriage being glass or not glass. And I had originally thought when I made that drawing that I might make the door a single pane of glass. That would, thinking if this is a touring vehicle, right, you could see more if there was more of it that was open. And I eventually changed the windows and door design, and I decided to keep them open. Most of the time I'm seeing, maybe all the time I'm seeing all my examples being open windowed, and it simplifies things for me a little bit. So and here I wanted to have, you can see me trying to figure it out, a sweeping arc to the rod that's holding the front wheel or wheels. I haven't decided if it's a double wheel just yet. And despite my best efforts looking at the templates, my circles, I just could not figure out a curve that would work. So I hand drew this one in. And actually it came out okay, but to get a nice smooth line, it required a lot of trying to clean it up. And it annoyed me a little bit, but in the end, I get a sense of what I was originally intending, at least. And again, I don't know how I'm going to make this. Maybe I can heat styrene rod until it's soft enough that I can bend, or I could do that with flat pieces. Anyway, I don't know. We'll see when I get there, but these are the kinds of things that I'm thinking about as I'm working on it. And I've decided that I was going to design it irrespective of how to construct it. I wanted to make it, let my design not be impeded by the construction. Of course, along the way, I've been a little worried at certain parts, but I can usually problem solve things somehow or another. I'll figure it out, and whatever I have to learn will only add to my skills, my toolbox, if you will. And you can see here why I really hone that tip of my eraser down so I can get in between those tiny lines. And it works out pretty well. So I turned back the cameras on here, and you can see I have changed the door and the windows. One of the things that I felt was that I had lost the Victorian look. And while it's, it's steampunk and it's set in, whatever, a Lovecraftian world, I realized that the sort of diving bell look that I had was not right, not thematically right. And you can see I have a note that says I need to change the bench supports and the undersides of the benches that's holding them up. I need to change that as well, but that's not really important right now. And because of the railing is in the way and everything, I decided I wasn't going to go back and try to revise that at this point, that I would do that a little bit later. And here you see me trying to put on the fenders for the front two wheels. I hadn't thought about that until towards the end. I was like, oh God, right. I need some mud splashers, basically. And I wanted to have this front fender have a little bit of a nice little curve to it, like a flare at the back. And I just couldn't figure out how to do that with my templates. And I decided in the end that I wouldn't worry about it. You'll see I eventually just put in a, see how close that is though to a little flare? It's like I need a tighter corner than what is possible on the French curves template. So in the end I decided I'll just put in a round one for now and I'll figure it out later. This is actually the first time that I've done, excuse me, that I've done so much work with templates on a drawing. And that was kind of interesting on its own, as I really like the crispness of the effect that it produces. But I did spend quite a bit of time trying to line up things and you know, make them consistent. And, for instance, doing this fender work, I have to choose 2 different diameters of circles to be able to create parallel lines. And so then it's like figuring that out and which one. And it's part of why the process was, part of why the process was a little slow. I guess that's probably the best way to describe it. One thing that I realized actually almost at this exact point during the process is that it would have been nice to draw from front to back, right? So I could draw around things that were blocking. Actually, I kind of knew this when I was working on the machinery, section in the back where I drew in front pieces and then drew in stuff behind it so I didn't have to erase as much. But I think I wouldn't have been able to do that with the carriage, for instance, itself, because I didn't know where to put the wheels until I had the carriage in, for instance, or I didn't know where I'd have to put the railing until I had the benches in, so I couldn't really do that way. But on the rear wheel, I certainly could have put in the gear first and then the spokes, or the spokes first, and then the gear, but, whatever. But it was a sort of an interesting thought as I was going through it. It's like the order of operations can save you time. Oh, there's something else I didn't mention. When I erase and I want to get the eraser bits off of the page, I use a soft paintbrush to brush them off. And this helps reduce smudging of the pencil. And what's unfortunate is because I'm left-handed, although I suppose on this kind of a work, right-handed person would have the same problem, I tend to smudge it with my pinky as my pinky is resting on the paper. So I try pretty hard to not touch the paper as I'm working, but even with, I try to have my hand off to the side if it's at all possible. But even with that care, even the ruler actually dragging across the paper, and that'll pick up some of the pencil lead, and that'll smudge it. So when I'm done with my draft, I actually give it a clear coat. And there are, professional sketching sprays that you could put over to preserve sketching from that sort of, abrasion damage, rubbing off, smearing. Yeah, why am I getting all fancy? Abrasion damage, smudging, that's what it's called. But I just use a can of matte clear coat. I just spray it, and when it dries, it gives it a nice protective layer. It actually darkens the pencil too. I'll do that at some point here before I go to the very end, and you'll see that color change. But that's what I do. I never thought about it before. You could actually, well, I was going to say you could do it partway through, but no, you don't want to cover the paper and then try to draw on top of that, probably. So anyway, that's a little bit of a thinking on the spot. So I decided that I do like the idea of a canopy, and here I decided maybe I'd put one over the rear bench only. And one of the things I realized, and I had a note on it a ways back on the second version, I think, that if I put a canopy all the way across, it will block your view of the miniature sitting on the benches. And I was like, I'm going to spend all that time on them. I don't want that to happen. But having a partial canopy over the rear bench doesn't create that kind of an effect. And I think it would add a nice... It finishes the top of the carriage a bit. Just having the benches exposed and not having anything up there, to me, makes it feel unfinished. And I don't know if that's because I'm so used to seeing roofs on vehicles, right? We very rarely see an open-topped vehicle unless it's like a farm wagon or something. So I decided that I would put one in. It took me a little while to figure out how to draw that, make it look sensible, and I get pretty okay at the end here. You'll see, but I've been looking around for miniatures. If you're a patron, then you will see one of the posts I had somewhat recently. I've listed all the companies that I found that have steampunk miniatures, and I've scoured the web for them. And one of the sites that I found has carriages, and they're not necessarily steampunkish. Some of them are for sure, but one of them has a canopy on it and a few other interesting bits that might be useful. So right now I'm contemplating purchasing a couple pieces from this site and then using them, sort of, oh my gosh, what do you call it when you cut apart kits and you put them together into your own thing? It's not scratch build. It's right now you're just shouting at me. It'll come to me in a minute. Kit bash, that's what it is. And so I might kit bash some of them. The only problem is the carriages that are sold come with a pair of horses as well. And the carriages are a little, I mean, they're not expensive for what you're getting, actually. I think it's pretty reasonable. But, they're in the $20 range or so. And that's maybe 25 even, maybe 30. And that adds up if I want more than one. So, because right now I'm expecting this to cost probably at least $50 in miniatures. Definitely for the whole project more, but I think for the carriage, if I've got, 6, what have I got? Maybe 8 miniatures, maybe more, 10, right? And actually that leads me to thinking about, I thought about passengers in the actual internal carriage area, and that adds its own challenge. So moving to something fresh. So I had purchased these watch hands, and I got some gears. This was for a project a while back, and I picked these up on Etsy. And it occurred to me when I was looking at them that they might work really well for the railing. Now, the set I bought has some duplicates in it, but it doesn't have enough duplicates. But it would be easy to get another larger bundle, and in fact, it seems like people who are selling these get these from similar sources. So I expect I would get multiple dupes later on, and all I need is what is that, 5, 10? I need 12 uprights for the uprights, posts, if you will, of the railing. And I have some flexibility in how I choose. I could mix parts for the actual cross beams. These are some of the gears that I have, and these are great. I love them, and they, excuse me, and they work really well for certain areas of the structure. You can see me kind of getting some ideas, but this set of gears in particular don't have any thick gears. These are all very thin. These are watch part gears, and they won't work, say, for the large cog for the wheel, because trying to make sure that these very, very thin pieces all line up properly is a nightmare. I don't even want to try doing that, when they're meeting edge on. So I'm going to have to get some that are a little bit thicker. And I actually took a look around, and I found some great bundles. I haven't ordered them yet, but I found some that will work really well. And some of these will need some modification, cutting off some of the posts. And one thing I discovered is that I need to get some non-magnetic tweezers, because many of these small parts, as you may have already noticed or will, stick to my tweezers, and that doesn't make it easier to work with these things. I have one pair of ceramic tweezers, and I will be purchasing another pair. There's actually a set that's like $8, and they're really, oh, not ceramic actually, but they're fine-tipped, non-magnetic tweezers, and that would just be perfect for doing this kind of work. Because these bundles do come with posts. There's one stuck to my tweezers. And I don't know, it's not like you're getting the right posts for the right gears necessarily, but I don't need them to be. I just need them to kind of fit, and when they glue them, they won't slop around. So I'd like to be able to potentially assemble some of these gears to create, stacks that have different gear ratios, for instance. Or I don't really have plans on exactly how or what I'm going to do with that. That'll be something I decide when I finally start getting to the construction and getting to the areas that need gears. But it is something I'm thinking about ahead of time. And so that was one of the things when I was out looking for gears, actually today before I started shooting this video here, that I was trying to see if I could find sets that have some improved thickness and that would allow me some kinds of abilities to, stack them without having to try to meet these ultra thin sections. Some of these are a little thicker, but if you notice, like on these larger gears, because they have those thin radial arms, right? See how much lighter they feel than the one that I put in. The one I put in is actually kind of like what you see cheaper plastic gears, and they'll have that large infill for strength because they're plastic, But when I find the right gears for this, I'll be able to see how that. Oh my God, that's so frustrating. And at this point, I think I went to go get my, there's my ceramic tweezers, and now I can do at least one side non-magnetically, Eesh. So this is going to be something to play with when I get to that stage. And as you can imagine, there's going to be quite a bit of fiddling and piecing together and test fitting and lining up. But I don't know, it's kind of fun to work with these little tiny bits. I have some magnifying goggles, headpiece, whatever, that will help me to see these parts when I'm working on them, because trying to fit them to some of these posts is like yeesh. And it gave me a little bit of an appreciation of watchmakers and what they do. I'm laughing at myself trying to fit these parts. They're very persnickety, and I think when I get the other tweezers, that's going to be interesting all on its own because they have such small tips. Holding things, it seems like it would be a challenge, but also a benefit. I don't know. We'll see. See, now this one has a little pinion gear on it, and I'd like to get those off maybe. I don't know how I can. I don't want to cut them off, only because maybe they fit that rod really well or something. I don't know. I'm going to have to play with them, and I'm going to have a pile probably like 3 times this size to sort through when I'm done, so who knows? Who knows? But I did want to sit down once I mean, I could have just shown you these and packed them all up in about 30 seconds and put them away. But I wanted to sit with them for a second and just play around with the ones I have. And that also gave me a sense of, maybe what I could look for when I purchase some others. But amazing how none of these seem to fit any of the post materials that I tried out. But you can see there's all sorts of weird bits and doodads, and so I'm sure some of them fit some of them, but yeesh, Now, see, that's nice. See how that little screw end fit right in there? That's what I'm talking about. And I don't know if you're going to be able to see any in this, but almost, let's see here. Right here, there is a little tiny watch hand, and there are a couple watch hands that I have that are even smaller than this, and they're going to be perfect for like a little dial gauge, you know, in the back, a pressure gauge or something like that. So I don't know. I like things in miniature, obviously, and I think it's just going to be kind of fun when I get to that final stage of piecing together all these little bits and doodads and trying to see what kind of intricate cog working I can make. See what I mean, though? It's like nothing fits anything. How the hell does that all work out? I don't know. What the hell kind of parts do they throw together? I think they just have like this giant vat of parts, and then they just scoop it out. They sell it by the gram. You know, you get like 10 grams for $8 and 20 grams for 12 or whatever. And I think this was maybe like a 10-gram bag, something like that. So it'll be interesting to see what gets scooped in the next one. Although I saw some on eBay that were a little more specific in the lot that you would get. And so, you know, I'm just going to have to shop around for a couple hours and find a couple that I like. And I'd like to get some more watch hands as well. Like I said, I'll be trying to create the railing with the watch hands, which I think is just going to look fantastic and much easier than me trying to, you know, place little styrene rods or something which isn't going to look ornamental. I want it to look a little ornamental. But, oh, there's one. See? Look at that. Look at that. I can't even get it off my tweezers. Even the ceramic ones. I don't know. I think it's like a static electric. Look at how small that one is. See? Isn't that nice? If you're just looking over now, it's right here. Isn't that nice? And, oh, and for the cart, I was thinking I don't want to make it too ornamental because it's a commercial coach. You know what I mean? This isn't a fancy livery, so I can't dress it up too much. But I did want it to have, you know, a little fanciness, which I think helps. Steampunkish constructs tend to have a little flair to them. I think not always, but it's maybe the style that I like the most. So, and you can see me picking all these up on the draft because I've already clear coated it. So now I don't have to worry about smudging it, and I can kind of just manhandle it as needed. My God, though, picking all these up, it's like I have to stick them to my fingers to get them off. Some of these parts are so small. It's crazy. Makes me wish I was a watchmaker. But in here, real quick, we're just about done it, is some of the large watch hands I have. And wait a minute, I'm going to pause it here for a second, and I'm about to pick them up. But like this watch hand, it's a little bit big, but what I can see in my mind, or like this one up here, is using this as the axle holder for the rear wheel. And then I've got a little dress work that is the connector to the vehicle itself, you know, cut it off and glue it into an insert or something like that. So, even these larger ones were giving me some ideas about things I could do to make some connections with some of the different areas. So, oh gosh, and looking, what if I took like this and I cut these off, cut this here, and then I could use these, you know, almost like as the support for the front wheel, right? You get something like that. So I'm going to be looking for these kinds of bits to help solve some of the construction issues that I can't do, say, by making a template and cutting it on my scroll saw. So a lot of options of how to tackle the problems, and some fun in picking out some of the pieces to solve those. So this wraps it up. Hope you've enjoyed the journey along this drafting process. And hopefully next video, I'll have a mock-up ready, and I'll have well, at least the mock-up started, and I'll have the top view done as well. So I hope you enjoyed taking a look at that. It's challenging to put that together, and how I'm going to build some of the elements are a mystery to me, but I didn't let that stop me in terms of what I wanted to design. I just said, don't worry about how you're going to build it. Just think about what you want to build. But I have a lot of ideas, and I have explained several of them in the longer at the bench version. So if you're watching that version, sorry for repeating. But if you haven't seen that version, I talk quite a bit about different ways I'm going to tackle some of the more challenging pieces. So you can see that there if you're interested. So I'm going to do the top version of it next, and that should actually go comparatively quickly because it's dictated by the profile shot. And then I can make a very rough mock-up. Trust me, I am not doing all the little doodads, but I just wanted the shape, and then I can put that out and see. And I have some modifications for the diorama in mind, but I don't want to tell you what those are right now. So think of that as a little teaser. Get you back, right? Hopefully you'll come back. And if you are enjoying my videos and you enjoy this channel, if you wanted to support me on Patreon, that's a tremendous help to keeping this channel going. And you can follow the link, which will be there, I believe. There's also a PayPal me link in the description if you are not interested in becoming a patron. It's a great way, though, patron, to see all snippets and behind the scenes and some extra content. Also, I'm on Instagram, which I think is here. And I'm not super frequent on it, but I'm also not absent on it. Maybe a photo a week, maybe more frequently, varies a little bit. So that's another way to kind of get sneak peeks at what is going on. But before I go on too long, I will wrap it up here and say, hopefully you will be coming back to see the top version and the 3D mock-up. That's the goal for next week. Do my best. And you'll come back to see that because you know that I will be back soon with another Terranscapes video.